think we're alone now. Doesn't seem to be anyone around. Except for Richard and Rachel from Sudbury Politics, the show. Hey, Richard.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing? Thanks for singing.
Guess that's our new form of entertainment in this COVID-19 era we're living in. So thanks, Jeff, for your awesome vocal skills. And thanks to our followers for tuning in with us again.
So it's been a crazy, I don't know, has it been a year, a month since COVID started? I can't tell anymore. But the world's changed. The way politics works seems to have changed. We've moved to e-council meetings, conversations about e-parliament, but Andrew Scheer doesn't seem to be too happy about it. Richard, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think what we're looking at here is, an opposition that's trying to have something, some handhold on the political environment right now. The leaders, the premiers, the prime minister, they're holding daily press briefings. They're standing with the medical officers of health. They're announcing major programs and really trying to, I think, do their best to keep us all afloat. The opposition doesn't have much more to say other than we should be holding you to account somehow, even though we're all sort of on board. So how do we do that? And, maybe we need to all get together. And so I feel like it's a little bit contrived of the opposition right now to be worrying too much about how Parliament works. I don't think that's what's on Canadians' minds. What do you think, Rachel?
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's probably not the number one issue on our fellow Canadians' minds. Definitely an interesting time in terms of seeing different levels of government enforcing measures and changing the way that they govern and the manner in which they deliver that governance. On our municipal level, of course, we've seen the city of Greater Sudbury adapt in the sense of now doing their council and committee meetings remotely and online. Of course, still live stream for the community, but they're not meeting face to face because of social distancing. So what's interesting to me, especially about that, being an election geek, of course, and having worked at the city and in clerks before, is seeing how this emergency situation is requiring that the province amend pieces of legislation that they've enacted that trickle down to the municipalities and affect the way the local city, the local government works. So in this case, province has to come in, actually amend the municipal act, so amend the legislation that dictates how council meets and how they operate their meetings. And they had to do that amendment to just allow them to meet remotely. So to me, that's quite a fascinating piece on that level.
Yeah, I kind of found it surprising that there wasn't some kind of existing emergency legislation for how councils, parliaments, all of these things can act in a crisis, right? There's so many different natural disasters or things that could possibly happen in an emergency that would not allow parliamentarians to fly back and forth to Ottawa or for people to meet in a specific building. So it's bizarre that there isn't something that already exists in this realm.
Well, they've been using, there is sort of, right? And we saw it used throughout the emergency so far, in that you count on small groups of parliamentarians from all the parties, sort of equally ratioed based on the existing seat count, getting together. So like 30 MPs or whatever will come together and not needing the whole House of Commons to do that. So they've been using that pretty effectively. But that there is, like, we're talking about if the federal side anyway, what, online petitions didn't even come around like maybe 3 years ago. I think it was 4 years ago that Stuart Kennedy's online petitions motions finally made its way through the House and were approved, and now we can have online petitions. So, you know, they're working pretty fast. Do you really think that the legislation that was binding the municipalities was archaic? I mean, we think we've kind of been using that word in talking about this in advance. Would you call it archaic?
Well, on the parliament level, that's not necessarily legislation. That's a gentleman's agreement to not, for everybody to only show up with so many MPs. We already had a conservative MP that just decided to show up anyways, right? And break with that agreement.
Yeah.
On the municipal level, I think it's a historic thing of municipalities, and ours in particular, to be quick to adapt to change or to new technology, and to make those shifts as they happen. And you know, province as well, you look at the legal industry still needs to fax everything legally to do their jobs, is pretty crazy, right? We should be beyond that at this point, but those things are so slow to move that we're stuck in this kind of archaic system. Though at the same time, I would defend that system in a normal time, right? I think people should be coming together to cast ballots and vote, and that we should have our MPs come back to Parliament, because their job is to be their region's representation in Ottawa. And if they're not coming back and making that case in the halls of Parliament, they're doing their constituents a disservice, because they're, you know, not bringing that voice back.
Rachel, it's a bit early to be talking about what we should be keeping in the future for what we're adapting now. Do you think some of these changes should stay?
Absolutely, I do. I think that our democracy and society is moving forward, and the way in which candidates engage and voters engage are modernizing, but sometimes our democratic institutions and our democratic legislation is behind. So I'm not saying that, you know, we should go from meeting in Ottawa with all of our MPs to them just meeting all remotely, but I think there's aspects of what we're seeing now that would be beneficial to keep as we move forward. You know, for example, you'd mentioned, Richard, the petitions online for federal government level, but on the municipal level, they still don't do online petitions for citizens. So I think simple things like that would be huge, and especially, you know, for accessibility purposes as well, but I won't go on an accessibility rant now. But to me, that's very important.
I mean, it's not surprising to me that it's the opposition that's saying, no, we need to get together, and the governments that are saying, no, online is fine. There's an accessibility to the government that, and a transparency to the government. I mean, I think that particularly applies to provincial and federal levels, because the municipal seat of government is where the entire government works, and you can access them as a citizen. But you can't do the same thing with the upper levels unless they gather together in one place on a regular basis at a regular time to be held accountable by elected officials in a question period. Well, that's just Andrew Scheer's thing, right? We need to have a question period, and then, you know, government commentators and others are saying, well, that's just Andrew Scheer wanting the Conservatives to have a moment in the sun, because, well, hey, Justin Trudeau's got an 11:15 press conference that the whole world is stopping to watch right now because there's nothing better on TV.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, thanks. I was going to say, so to me, one of the options, of course, would be to have MPs right now have an ability to vote remotely, so that you have all of them exercising their voice right now, instead of sending 30, or I forget the number you had mentioned earlier, to Ottawa, sitting distance apart and voting. I wouldn't, as I said, recommend that, forever, but I think there's aspects of that flexible voting piece for our politicians that could be crucial. If you look at getting women to run, which of course is something that I'm passionate about, but you see a lot of women who are hesitant to enroll, especially, or put their name in the hat on a federal level, because they have these families at home and they can't travel as much. So maybe one-off with, once in a while they can vote remotely for whatever issue it is. And then as well, allowing, especially these MPs that are traveling from all over Canada, allowing them, more flexible voting, they would have more time to be present for their constituents in their riding and, be in that riding more. I know, as I worked in Paul's constituency office, I couldn't believe how much time he spent in Ottawa, which I totally understand, but you would see more of that perhaps.
Or you would see them none at all, right? I mean, if all they have to do is log in twice a day to cast their ballot when the roll calls them, or click some neat button on their parliamentary voting screen, and that's their job for the day, and that's where they draw their $180,000 salary or whatever it is. I mean, I think that there's very little, the public does not understand what politicians do. And I know they earn their money because I've seen it. But, at the very least, going there and standing up when your name is called in front of everybody is a thing that you can actually say that I did do. And then if you don't do that, you can be called out on it, right? Which some politicians are sometimes. I don't think making it easier for them for the ones that don't want to do their jobs to not do their jobs is the way to go. But also, I don't really think this is where Canadians' minds are at right now, either, particularly.
No, well, I think that's one of the dangers in a crisis, right? Is Canadians' minds aren't on the basic tenets of democracy anymore. When you're in an emergency, you start taking away people's rights because you have to control the emergency. And when you lose focus on that, it's easy for governments to stretch things in a way that probably aren't good for everybody. One of the things I do find interesting that, I am curious is question period through like a Zoom platform. It would be the first time in Canada's history that parliamentary rules were actually followed, because you wouldn't just be able to yell at people. You wouldn't be able to pound your desk when somebody says something you disagree with, or shout stupid comments. You'd be forced to wait your turn and say your piece and listen to the answer, reply to the answer. These are all things that don't happen. And
not reply to the answer.
Yeah, and like it would be like watching a sitcom without a laugh track. Like you wouldn't have the shame, da, 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 da.
New Democrats would find a way.
It would be one less task for Danielle controlling the mics and cameras too, which wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
What does all this say about the, that we've talked a little bit about the personalities of our political leaders in the crisis environment, and how in this case we're talking about a little bit about how the opposition has to kind of scramble a little bit, but we're seeing some interesting contrasts between leaders and local politicians as well, I think. What are we seeing that's what's most interesting?
Well, it's really interesting because there's the natural political styles of people, right? So you got a guy like Doug Ford, who's consummate retail politician. He's all about shaking hands. He's all about getting right in front of people. You have people like Justin Trudeau, who's very at home, working with the experts within his field, taking in all the information and then communicating it out, and more of a wholesale politician where he's interacting on that global level. I think it's interesting to watch that dichotomy where you have Doug Ford handing out PPE and, you know, making trips in his own truck, and you have Justin Trudeau, minus the one recent incident, staying at home and, you know, showcasing what it means to be, you know, social distancing and staying at home.
Not speaking moistly.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry, I meant to throw that in there.
I just have my bobblehead out now.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, you know, even I think Michael Vagnini, I had seen something from him pushing some stuff out where he was working out in the community. Again, another guy that does that. It was interesting watching the chamber had a group of all the local politicians and seeing where they're at. From our local leaders, what have you guys seen so far?
Well, it was pretty cordial. I mean, I don't think, Rachel, you haven't got a chance to see that recording yet, eh? You know, you won't, it's not like, there's not much to report. If you want to know what was said at that meeting, first of all, everyone thanked everybody and said that everyone was doing a great job. That took about half an hour. And that's fine. And then, you know, the government MPs talked about what the government was doing, and the official opposition MPPs from Ontario talked a little bit about what the government was not doing, but nobody had any real criticism or, you know, anything beyond what, you know, it was a small business thing, telling the small business community, you know, that they're important, that we're working for you. We look at all of the stuff we've done. That was basically the hour. That was my read. Jeff, did I miss anything?
Yeah, the closest thing you had to like a swipe, if you want to even call it that, Jamie West and France Jelinas somewhat calling out the provincial government on finding rent relief for small businesses. You know, that was the one piece where they were like, you know, we get that everything's moving really fast, but this needs to happen, and the government needs to be doing more to provide rent relief because small businesses are suffering out of no, you know, fault of their own, and they're a really important part of the economy. If you know 70% of our employers or employed people are through small businesses, if we don't find a way to keep them going, it's going to be a big problem.
I guess what I can add to this piece, of course, I didn't see that tape, but I'm just happy that the politicians are working together in this crisis. And that's what I see on a, you know, very general local level, but with provincial and federal as well. I mean, if you look at Doug Ford and Chrystia Freeland working together, and the fact that Chrystia Freeland called Doug Ford her therapist, that's definitely something that I never would have possibly imagined before COVID. So that's pretty much all I got.
Yeah,
well,
that's everybody relationship, something else.
One thing that I feel is that the politicians feel useful, right? I mean, I've been in political offices before where there really isn't a lot to do, you know, that you're working, you're serving individual constituency, and you're holding up some political viewpoint, and that's what you're pushing forward today, but you don't really feel like you're getting very far. If you're not in the government and there's a majority government, like I was there during the Harper years, and, you know, for a progressive politician, you know, you're kind of maybe scoring the odd political point or like making a local connection with you know, somebody who really needs something and you're able to kind of get it for them. I think that politicians right now, local politicians, feel feel useful, and I think they are being very useful in our community. They're bridges to programs at the provincial and federal levels. They're providing advice. They're proving themselves to be trusted communicators. Like I think they're having a bit of a moment, and maybe well deserved.
So, Richard, maybe there is something to say about having these politicians spend a little bit more time in their constituents or constituencies and being held accountable. But anyways, I don't know if you guys have anything more to add on that topic, but there's something I wanted to hear about this week from the both of you. So for everybody who's watching, I had the pleasure of being a 100% bystander to an epic throwdown or a slack down, whatever you want to call it, on our Slack chat between Richard and Jeff this week over the topic of what the federal government is doing or could do for rent subsidies for businesses. So I'll let you guys go at it here.
Well, it was my offhanded comment. I think it was actually on my Facebook. So it wasn't even like it wasn't internal. I think it started as a back and forth between Jeff and I on my own Facebook post, and this was before I knew the feds were going to come with what they ended up coming out with, which is zero interest loans and some eligibility stuff that was then passed on to the provinces to act. And I think that Jeff, you could tell us a little bit about. I think the situation remains that the provinces have to figure out what they're actually doing. And to me, it also came out of the chamber thing because I was shocked to hear New Democrat opposition politicians talk about handing government money, in bulk to our provinces or countries' commercial landlords. Like, I was like, what? What is that? Like, I believe in small businesses. Don't get me wrong. And I believe that small businesses should survive and thrive. But I don't think that the people that are holding the wealth asset in this country should be getting a direct transfer of funds from the federal government. I know Jeff has a different opinion.
Well, because you're wrong. It was never going to be a direct transfer.
Wrong about what part? The part where they're going to get a whole bunch of money from the government, or that it was a good idea?
Well, about that you support small businesses, clearly. There's a lot of small business landlords out there that we're going to be that are being hit by COVID right now. And that wealth asset is a lot of people's retirement money. Most of the people that are sitting at home right now doing okay after they worked their entire lives and made investments, a good chunk of that is probably in REITs that hold a lot of these small commercial leases. And it's not like the expenses go away for these buildings because there's a shutdown. In fact, a lot of the expenses are going up. We're seeing vandalism become an issue with everybody supposed to be locked at home. And the reality is small businesses are hurting like crazy right now. The margins on things like restaurants are so paper thin that for those guys to survive, especially a restaurant that's only been around less than 5-6 years, they probably don't have a cushion to deal with this. And they're doing what they can to do takeout and serve people and keep a few people employed. But man, like, this continues. We already know there's a lot of small businesses that couldn't make rent last month. If they can't make rent this month, we're going to start hitting problems where people aren't going to be employed when this is done.
And that is completely understandable, and making sure that those businesses can stay afloat does not necessarily mean directly transferring a rent check to their landlords who aren't necessarily in that situation. I mean, you're holding up retirement savings in REITs as look, retirement savings. Everyone's retirement savings are in the tank right now. Everybody's. Why should the real estate investment trusts be protected from that when all other forms of pension investment and retirement investment are at a great deal of risk and have lost a massive amount of value? Like, to me,
because with every other section of the economy, we're trying to do everything we can to keep business from failing, to keep things from failing. And real estate investment trusts are no different. There's a difference between something going down in price and something failing. And yeah, if there's a drop in a real estate investment trust right now, that sucks. It's bad. It's going to hurt in the short term. But if it fails, that's a whole different thing. You're wiping out that person's future income.
Real estate investment trusts are not like other types of savings. They are built on a wealth asset, a capital asset, a hard asset, a building, a piece of property that will generate income if it has a tenant in it. So if I was a commercial landlord, my number one goal would be to make sure that my tenants are protected so that I can have future revenue from those tenants. Current, existing revenue, I'm going to have to take a bath just like everybody else, unless government is convinced to come along and just cut me a check so that I don't have to worry about my expenses, and I don't have to worry about my property and my responsibilities losing value, but everyone else's are not protected the same way. That's my big issue.
We're going to be dumping money into the airline industry. We're going to be dumping money into thousands and thousands of different businesses over the next little while to keep them afloat. This is, a shared lift. And at no point was that program designed to not share the pain across the tenants, the landlords, and the government. And that's the same shared pain that we're going to see from the airline industry, because they absolutely cannot survive this as is. There's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of businesses that won't come out the other end of this. And, the idea that, okay, well, everything will just kind of work out in the end. You're wiping out a lot of wealth from a lot of people who don't have a lot of wealth. The people that have enough to get by and pay for their house and their retirement, those people, you're gonna, pinch that to a point where they can't get by anymore.
I think that I completely agree with all of that. What undercuts my fury about this to some extent is that the government didn't go the route of straight grants. You're looking at zero interest loans for landlords that accept half rent. So, none of those measures is what was being called for. Maybe the nuance was different from some groups or others, but what I was definitely hearing before the federal government made its announcement was give us a chance by paying our rent. We're small businesses. We want to stay open. We can't afford our rent. Please, government, pay our rent for us. I just think that's an irresponsible way of spending government money when the businesses are producing something and they're selling a product, whether that's a restaurateur or a retail outlet, and their product is their retail product that they're warehousing and selling, or whatever it is. The product is the work that's gone into that product. That's what's generating the income. It's operational income, is a stark contrast to capital wealth income. To me, the capital wealth in this country, and it represents a huge share of our total our total national wealth, tied up in capital, in this hard capital, in these buildings that our commercial landlords are owning. I would just have been aghast if what was decided was we're just going to spend $20 billion to pay off these rents for an inordinate amount of time. But it didn't happen. And I'm wondering, Jeff, my question back to you is, do you see a deficiency in what the government announced?
Well, we're going to have to see what the province comes in with. Clearly, if you are a restaurateur and you can't sell a hamburger next week because the government's telling you can't serve a hamburger, they've kind of broken the deal with you, right? As to,
yep.
We've given you a business license, we're going to let you operate. Granted, everybody's saying, yeah, no, we get why, but you've taken away their ability to earn income. You need to come to the table and say, this is how we're going to help you survive this next little while, so you can bring your employees back and everybody's not on employment insurance for the next 20 years. So we need to see what the province does with it. From the beginning, the push was always about a shared pain, so that, get some kind of agreement from landlords that they'll decrease rent over the time. Have the federal government support that so that, small businesses may end up paying zero rent, up to, larger businesses that probably have some bank or something behind them may pay, significantly more or moderately more depending on their size. But it's about sharing that pain across the economy so that we don't end up in this situation where we don't have businesses back to go to.
Well, I enjoyed the debate, right? Like, and I don't mind being a little bit wrong on occasion. But I also, especially when it means that, we're not just handing over big government checks directly to the largest wealth holders in the country. That would make me sick. And to see it come out of New Democrat politicians calling for that's what I thought they were calling for. I'm like, my head is now exploding. Boom. I know that wasn't the result of what they wanted. We want the small businesses to survive. We want them to make it through this time, because we all know the minute this is over, we're going to rush out to the closest possible restaurant and we're going to sit there, we're going to eat our food in the restaurant, and then we're going to go to another one. And then we're going to go to another one. And then we're going to go to a bar. And then we're going to go to a store. We're going to hang out in the store for a couple of hours and buy something. Well, we just have to get there. And, so yeah, I mean, absolutely, we want to get to that point. I just, I think that there are measured ways. And I think the federal government took a measured way. We'll see what the provinces do with it. But if the government federal government wants to spend a little bit more money and modify the program somewhat, I'm okay with that. Are you satisfied with that, Rachel? Was that hall brawl enough?
Yeah. Did you admit you were wrong? I'm not sure what happened there. I'm kind of like a little struck over here. That was I wouldn't
go that far. I wouldn't go so far. I'd say
give it enough time, he'll get to use full rub.
I'm just kidding. No, that was great. I appreciate the entertainment other than just Jeff singing. So yeah, it's great. And I'm super happy that we're doing these weekly now, and our episodes will be going out every Tuesday at 10 a.m. So if 2 weeks wasn't enough for you, now you get a double dose. So yeah. Fellas,
we'll see you guys all next week again, I guess.
Yeah, and keep watching. We're going to be pursuing our media series, and I'm assuming that we'll have some special guests lined up over the next few weeks that you won't want to miss. So make sure you tune in. Thanks for debating and having a fun time tonight. I'm glad you guys joined. I'm glad everyone tuned in.
And I'll thank you guys for your debating, because it's great to hear both sides of that. And I just want to say to everyone out there, keep that legislation modern. Let's go forward, not backwards. Thank you.
And always twirling, twirling, twirling towards freedom.
Oh, and cheers, right?
Hey, cheers.
Yeah, cheers from Sudbury Politics and Rachel, Richard, and Jeff. Ciao.
Good night.
Night.